the release of Captain Marvel, we got a pair of new people joining the MCU directing team, so today we're going to stop and rank all 15 MCU directors from the worst to the best. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Sean Chandler, and I started this channel because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies way too much. If you can relate, you're probably in the right place and consider clicking that subscribe button. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down in the comment section. Share your ranking of the MCU directors. You can see the list down below in the description if you need a little refresher of which ones did which. But as we go into this, tell me, which ones do you absolutely love? Which ones do you wish they kind of tossed out and didn't direct any of the MCU films? As I go into this, I'm ranking them based off their influence as well as their quality. So there might be a director who had a first movie that was incredibly important and impactful. They might be really high in my ranking, even if their second film disappointed me. With that said, let's get started. In last place is Alan Taylor for Thor: The Dark World. This is widely regarded as one of, if not the worst film in the MCU. A lot of that is because it is a very weak villain, and a lot of that is because the direction is not very good. He never really hammered out what he wanted the film to be or what the tone should feel like. Also, the story is pretty clunky in the storytelling. It's not entirely clear why things are happening. A lot of that goes back to that very weak villain. This film overall doesn't make much of an impact on the MCU overall besides a few little plot points here and there, but that's the screenwriter. That's not Alan Taylor. He didn't make a good movie, and he didn't make a movie that really influenced the MCU at all, so he comes in last. Coming in at number 14 is Louis Leterrier for The Incredible Hulk. Now, I don't actually think that this is a bad movie. I'm a defender of this film in general, but in a lot of ways, it's the black sheep of the MCU. It was actually produced by a different studio than any of the other films inside of the MCU, and it doesn't have the fun, jokey tone of the rest of the films inside of the franchise. It's a little bit more serious, especially self-serious in the way it treats its subject matter, so it just feels off. But as a movie in general, I think he made a movie that has some great action sequences, especially the stuff with the Hulk, that's handled in a way that's exciting, where you can see all the action that's happening. But as we're ranking them as MCU directors, he made a good enough movie, but not one that fits inside of the MCU. At number 13 is Shane Black with Iron Man 3. As a Shane Black film, I think it's got some nice, sharp dialogue that goes really nicely with Robert Downey Jr.'s timing, as well as some very cool action sequences, the plane rescue, as well as the climax of the film being the standouts of the film. As an MCU film, it infuriated millions upon millions of comic book fans and MCU lovers. Shane Black really likes to subvert expectations and turn tropes on their head. So in his efforts to be clever, he came up with this Mandarin twist that just seems really ridiculous inside of this universe. And whereas most MCU films feel like a love letter to the fans, this one feels a little bit like a middle finger to the fans. Even the end of this film doesn't seem to jive with where the rest of the MCU goes, in particular with Tony Stark as Iron Man. So it's a movie that has some strong moments, but as a place in the MCU, this is really much more of a Shane Black side project than it is an MCU film. Number 12 is Anne Boden and Ryan Fleck for Captain Marvel. Now, I've seen this movie twice, and it's a good enough entry into the MCU. It's a lot of fun to go back to the 90s, and they captured that vibe pretty well. It's especially fun to see a young Nick Fury, but as I've said in my previous reviews, their direction felt a little bit like someone different was directing each scene, which in the case of this movie, kind of was the case. There was actually like 4 or 5 people that came up with the story and the screenplay, and then 2 different directors, and that's what the movie felt like. But the big reason they're kind of lower on the list is more so because they didn't necessarily add anything in particular to the world of the MCU. We went to the cosmic, but we've been to the cosmic before. We've been to Earth with kind of quippy joking people, and we've seen that before. This felt like a solid additional entry that was run through the Marvel machine. So for me, while I don't think they did a terrible job or anything like that, they just didn't do anything specifically distinct. Coming in at number 11 is Jon Watts for Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, I think this movie is a ton of fun. I think it's one of the most rewatchable films in the entire MCU. And it's a ton of fun to see the world of the MCU and being a superhero from the perspective of a high schooler. One thing that also is nice about what Jon Watts did with the film is it has a bit of a John Hughes vibe to it, which is an interesting new take on the MCU in general. But all of kind of the fun things he did really just work inside of this film. He didn't create a film that leaked out into the rest of the MCU. He just directed a very solid, fun, likable film. So for me, if you're trying to factor in both the quality, he made a quality film, but he didn't make necessarily an influential film, so he's not one of the stronger MCU directors in that regard for me. Kicking off the top 10 is Peyton Reed for the Ant-Man films. Much like how Jon Watts gave us a John Hughes-esque MCU film, Peyton Reed gave us a heist movie inside of the MCU, and what is almost an all-out comedy. When you've got someone like Paul Rudd, who is just so naturally funny, and then you write a character like Michael Peña's character in this film with all of his storytelling, it's one of the funnier mini franchises inside of the MCU. And along the same lines, it has a distinct style to the way it does its storytelling with the heist plot line. And he found a way to visualize the shrinking down in the first film and then going big that's very cool and very exciting. Now, these aren't some of the more important films inside of the MCU, but he did introduce us to the quantum realm, what it looks like, and it could potentially have a pretty important role in the next film in the MCU. So for me, I think this one is just a little bit more important, his contributions, than Jon Watts were. At number 9 is Scott Derrickson for Doctor Strange. On just a plot level, this film probably fits a little bit too much into the Marvel origin story template. But as soon as you move beyond that basic story structure, this is one of the most creative and vivid films inside of the entire MCU. The visual effects in this film, I think, are kind of the most gorgeous to me. Whether you're talking about the bending cities, the way it visualizes the circle sparkly magic type things, there's just a bunch of great looking visuals. Along those same lines, Scott Derrickson was responsible for introducing us to the world of magic inside of the MCU, which has had some big impacts going into films such as Infinity War. He had both created a visually delicious movie as well as a film that had some new nuggets for the MCU for us. At number 8 is Kenneth Branagh for Thor. Now, this is the film that introduced us to the cosmic realms of the MCU. This is our first journey into space, and he established our first glimpse at all of this. This is the guy that brought us Chris Hemsworth as Thor and Tom Hiddleston as Loki, some of these foundational key characters inside of this universe. And he did all of this with the Shakespearean grandeur that his past filmography would naturally bring to a film like this. When it comes to the specific plotting of the film, I didn't think the storytelling itself was necessarily the strong point, but when it comes to establishing the world of the MCU, he put some of those foundational pieces in place, established a bunch of the rules and these characters that are so important for this universe. So that's why he made it into the top 10. Coming in at number 7 is Joe Johnston for Captain America, the First Avenger. Much like Kenneth Branagh, he brought a very distinct visual style to the film with his production design. The choice in the lenses that he used just gave it this different look, like we were in a different time that fit the story that they were telling so well. Along the way, he was responsible for crafting one of the most important characters inside of the MCU and making us understand who he was. And for me, that first hour of Steve Rogers' origin story from going from skinny kid to hero Captain America is some of the most powerful and emotional stuff inside of the MCU. A very important, once again, foundational piece inside of the MCU that cast some of these really important characters for all of this, introduced things like the Tesseract into the mix, and brought Captain America to the present day in a way that establishes so well who his character is. Number 6 is Taika Waititi with Thor Ragnarok. Now, he did two very important things with this film. First off, he redeemed Thor. The first two films were a little bit uneven in their reception, in particular that second film, and Taika Waititi found a way to take that character, bring him back, and make him so incredibly likable, funny, and make a crowd pleaser of a film. The second really important thing that he did is he made possibly the funniest movie in the entire MCU. Every single character in this film is vibrant, quirky, interesting, and really, really funny. As the movie goes along, whether you're talking about the color scheme, the score to it, the look, the design, everything just has such a distinct voice to it. The way he tells stories and wants things to look pops, sticks out. And so Taika Waititi found a way to take a character that had been around in the MCU for a while, reinvent him, make him more interesting than ever, and at the same time, still kind of fit inside of the MCU. So he makes it into the top 6. Bringing us into the top 5 is Ryan Coogler for Black Panther. If Taika Waititi gave us the wackiest movie inside of the MCU, Ryan Coogler swung it around in the opposite direction and possibly gave us the most serious film in the MCU. This franchise is often known for kind of unassuming, fun blockbusters, and here Ryan Coogler made a movie that had something to say, and it said it through storytelling. Along the way, he crafted an interesting narrative with different sides, with different worldviews and perspectives that come to conflict both ideologically as well as, well, because it's an action movie, punching each other in the face a whole lot. As much as I love the MCU just for kind of telling fun stories, it's nice to know that they can go a little bit deeper at times, and Ryan Coogler proved that. Also, he came up with a great way to have a look for Wakanda that looks futuristic while looking very African at the same time. Now, Best Picture nomination, that seems a little bit exaggerated to me, but still a great addition to the MCU. Remember to share your ranking down below in the comment section. I have that list of the directors in the description to kind of jog your memory a little bit. Also, after this video, check out this playlist right up here of some of my lesser seen Marvel rankings. One where I do a showdown of all the MCU trilogies, the Fantastic Four movies ranked, bunch of fun stuff like that. If you enjoyed this video, there's something in there that you will love. Coming in at number 4 is James Gunn for the Guardians of the Galaxy films. James Gunn found a way to make the cosmic cool. The previous films in the cosmic realm had been like very Shakespearean and fantasy based. James Gunn made it this weird, quirky world that you might want to go visit that's a little bit more science fiction inspired. Along the way, he made a movie that has such a distinctly him sense of humor that's really, really funny, and made a group of characters that you absolutely fall in love with almost immediately, even though they're very weird and in some ways very unlikable characters. That was the brilliance of what James Gunn was able to do. Along the way, he also made one of the most heartfelt films inside of the MCU, where at the end of it, you're bawling over a tree dying. Now, I'm known for having some problems with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, but none of that negates the fact James Gunn had a huge impact on the galaxy and the tone of the MCU. Kicking off the top 3 is Jon Favreau for Iron Man 1 and 2. This is the director that created the template and the tone for the entire MCU. It's easy to forget that prior to Iron Man, Marvel was really kind of struggling to figure out how to have the right tone for these films. And so you could see films like Daredevil, Hulk, Ghost Rider that were just trying a whole bunch of things, but not quite sticking that tone quite right. Along the same way, he created the anchor for the MCU in Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark by casting this actor who people knew him as a great actor, but a very troubled actor at the same time. They found this person that just has so much charm and charisma and screen presence that he makes everyone around him better. And Jon Favreau was part of creating this character that has been so pivotal for this universe becoming what it is. And along the way, he made a very good origin story and world builder in the first film. Now, he also directed Iron Man 2, but I don't really hold Iron Man 2 too much against him because he wanted 3 years to write the script for that film and make the film, and he was only given 2 years. And because of that, it had some problems. It also had all the strengths of his direction that we saw in the first film. Our runner-up is Joss Whedon for the first 2 Avengers films. He did the impossible and found a way to take 4 very different franchises and merged them together into one cohesive film, and in doing so, created this thing that both the MCU and other studios have been trying to copy ever since the film came out. Along the same way, he drastically shifted a bit of the tone of the MCU by turning everyone into a wisecracker. If you look at most of Phase 1, there's only a few people that are just all-out comedian, wisecracking characters, and after this film, suddenly everyone is a whole lot funnier because Whedon made such successful, witty banter between all the characters, and that trickled out into the rest of the MCU. He also managed to give us one of the biggest crowd-pleasing third acts of any comic book movie ever. Now, the second film was a little bit weaker, pretty disappointing in certain regards, and some of that's on him, and some of that's on Kevin Feige for giving a few too many plot points that he had to tease for future films. But Joss Whedon was a monumental force for influencing where the MCU went. That goes back to him cracking the code on how to do that. But coming in first place is the Russo Brothers for their contributions to the Captain America films as well as Infinity War. Without question, they have been the dominant, influential force of the second half of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Starting with The Winter Soldier, they made a political thriller inside of this universe that had some great action, massive bombshell on the mythology of the MCU with your revelations about Hydra as well as S.H.I.E.L.D. From there, they did Civil War, this big kind of team-up movie that's really kind of Avengers 2.5 that once again tore the Avengers apart, established a specific tone for the way that these movies would have great action, still have the humor thrown in the mix, but having kind of some deeper drama in the way they're doing. And then, of course, they did the climax of all of the MCU to this point in time, Infinity War, a movie that merged all of the franchises together, gave us some fantastic action, and a movie that I think is one of the great comic book movies of all time. For me, they've batted 3 for 3, and they've knocked it out of the park every single time. They are the best and the most influential directors of the MCU. Remember to check out that playlist right over there with some of my more interesting rankings of Marvel franchises and movies. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.